Welcome to Season 2 of Factory Forward, the podcast where we explore the cutting edge innovations shaping the future of manufacturing. In this exciting kickoff to Season 2, we are joined by none other than Mark Beckmann, Director of Manufacturing Industry Solutions at Microsoft. With nearly 4 decades in IT and 17 years at Microsoft, Mark has been at the forefront of helping manufacturers drive operational excellence and innovation. From his journey in the manufacturing sector to Microsoft's role in accelerating Industry 4.0, Mark shares practical insights on how technologies like AI and IoT are redefining factory floors. Get ready to hear real-world examples of AI delivering ROI, the future of connected workers, and how manufacturers can stay ahead in an era of rapid technological advancement. Now, here's your host, Zishan Zia.
Hi, welcome to Factory Forward. Today I'm joined by Mark Beckmann, Director of Manufacturing Industry Solutions at Microsoft. With nearly 4 decades in IT and 17 years at Microsoft, Mark helps manufacturers drive digital transformation through Industry 4.0, AI, IoT, and smart manufacturing. He's a frequent speaker and as advisor on innovation and operational excellence in the industry. Mark, great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Thank you very much.
Mark, you came into IT at a time when it must have been seen as, as novel as AI is today. What brought you into manufacturing, or what was your personal career journey like?
Yeah, quite frankly, I got lucky. I landed at a company that was spun out of IBM, essentially. So when IBM disconnected hardware and software, it created a software opportunity for a lot of companies. To be perfectly candid, it was a new industry, and there weren't people that would be able to be hired into these roles and these jobs. And like I said, I got lucky because I have an education degree. I was certified to teach drafting, welding, woodworking, and the oddball was math. And they wanted somebody to build training materials so that they could train the next generation of workers in the software company. So I landed there literally out of school, wrote training materials, became a field engineer, and then eventually a salesperson, and then moved on to multiple roles in sales management, OEM partnerships, supply chain, all during the time I was in the Midwest. So I was selling a lot to manufacturers, but supply chain world really got me focused on manufacturing. And to be perfectly candid, business intelligence as it related to supply chain. And so that kind of parlayed into my time at Microsoft. And as you said, 17 years is in what we call an industry advisor.
Fantastic. I love that. I appreciate it. Mark, how do you see IoT, smart manufacturing, connected workers, AI, all of these buzzwords that have been transforming manufacturing or how do you see them transforming manufacturing over the next 5 years? And what role is Microsoft playing in this shift?
Yeah, well, let me give you some thoughts on, just IoT smart manufacturing in general. To me, what's interesting is Industry 4.0, which is smart manufacturing. Essentially, I would lump that into digital transformation as well. It's been around for 12 years. All right, it was started 12 years ago in Germany. It's filtered everywhere else. The reality is we're probably in the first quarter of that. If you look at previous industrial revolutions, they were anywhere from 30 to 40 years for the most part. And we're in the first quarter of that game. So there's still a lot more to be done. I can tell you some of the early IoT efforts were connected products. And that's grown quite well. In fact, if you look at any manufacturer, they're turning into a software company in addition to selling their products. And building services to service the equipment out in the field. Certainly we can see that in the auto sector. Even kind of the chemicals, pharmaceutical companies have services attached to some of their products. They might not be connected products per se, although devices certainly are connected for medical devices. But here's kind of what I see happening. You asked the question about the next 5 years. This is by far the most exciting time, I think, for manufacturers, because we had a series of things happen to them. We had COVID. We've now have geopolitical things that are impacting us. And if you just think of the supply chain side of the equation, now you've got tariffs that we need to think about as well that are coming into play. You got AI that's at the forefront and on the tips of every CEO's tongue these days. And as much as Industry 4.0 said, how can we use technology to get connected and get better information on our products and our equipment, AI is going to really accelerate that. Why? Because we have it on our smartphones, because we've used ChatGPT, because we've seen some of the power that it can provide us and just giving us information that, in a way, quite frankly, that's better than search, because I can build a task list, for example, on shift turnover. I can build a task list on maintenance, repair, and operation. So I think in the next 5 years, we're going to see more Industry 4.0, and we're probably going to get in the next 5 years to the third quarter of Industry 4.0 because of AI and the advancements and democratization thereof. Now, you asked how Microsoft plays in this, and I'll just briefly tell you, as a platform company, we build platforms that help democratize these technologies. So we think that, to be candid, third parties, independent software vendors, systems integrators are going to build a little bit of the last mile, but through a platform that allows us to deliver value on a foundational level that you can actually build on and grow going forward, and also be secure and sustainable going forward.
That makes sense, Mark. Mark, you talked about the AI piece here multiple times. Have you seen any real-world examples, or are you able to share any real-world examples where these AI solutions have been successfully implemented and are actually delivering an ROI on factory floors?
Yeah, a lot. And it's kind of amusing to me when people say, well, is there a real return on investment for AI? Here's the interesting thing. You walk into any manufacturing plant, and there's going to be manuals that tell us how to manage the CNC machines, the big assets, the equipment that moves pieces around. All of these things have manuals and documentation associated with it. If I've got a big machine or unit that does a key function, think a painting cell in a production line, all right? Those are key assets that if they go down, it's not good, all right? Tons of unstructured content associated with it, number one. And guess what? We have a lot of those people that manage those types of assets retiring or moving on to other opportunities, depending on what their geography is. All right. And we need that information. And by far, the easiest and quickest return on investment is amassing that data so that I can surface it to people that need to fix things. I used to joke, I said, there's two things that you need in a manufacturing operation: the availability of smartphones and the access to YouTube.
Nice.
Because I can, to a T, I can go into a manufacturing plant and say, who fixed that last time? And somebody will chuckle and say, well, we looked on YouTube to see how we could fix that. All right. Well, unstructured content being an important part of that, with co-pilots or GPT-like functionality, we can surface that information. But then I can also do some interesting things too, like my maintenance and repair information. When was it last fixed? What did we do? Now I've got the manuals tied with real-life information on the asset, that when I marry those things in a co-pilot type of way, I can fix stuff really quick. All right. And I can be real sure that I'm doing it the right way. Oh, by the way, actually, I filter that back into the systems that manage that and say, this is actually what took place. So that's one key thing. The other thing that we've seen is people really marrying ML and AI and GPT type capabilities together. One of the more successful examples of that is a company called Andritz. Andritz makes big equipment for the industrial space. One of the pieces of equipment they make is essentially a washing machine for pulp and paper business. And if that machine goes down, it's not good. All right. They built the analytics piece and the AI ML capabilities into a user interface, combined that with ChatGPT and the co-pilot structure, so that now I can have a conversation with that machine and understand what's going on, which puts them at the forefront with their clients and providing that service. But it also pushed the operators of those pieces of equipment in a better position in order to manage their operations. I'll tell you another quick one, right? And I'm going to tell you this because it's actually a couple years old, and it's a steel processing. It's actually a stainless steel company over in Finland that had the issue of it takes 20 years in order to upgrade to train an operator and to be fully proficient. And they said, well, those guys are going to retire. How do we get the next generation of operator? And you might appreciate this too, because they're putting cameras on the production process, the rolling process, and building models, because they've been doing this so long, they know what's going on, in order to help put autonomy into the operation to twist the knobs in order to produce the best grade of stainless steel. All right. So that's how they address some of the people issues. But then they've also been able to marry that information, because at some point in time, you might degrade the steel from a grade A to grade B to grade C. Well, if I marry that with my demand information, if it does degrade, I can easily see which customer might want to buy that today, which means that I might not have to put it in inventory for a period of time in order to figure out who I can sell this to. All right, and so this actually is an application that they built internal to the operation, but over the last 5 or 6 years, they've been kind of refining that and making tweaks and advancements and rolling out and scaling a bit more, which to me, I think is a powerful statement. Says we've actually had AI for a long time, all right, but we haven't had it democratized to the point where we can actually allow the masses to use its capabilities. And today, it's not a gating factor for anybody. Technology is not the problem. It's the people and their ability to absorb it and to do change management appropriately so that they can use the stuff in their production world.
I love that. I was actually going to ask you about, these workforce challenges, because we hear them from manufacturers all the time. It seems to be the biggest challenges, that manufacturers are facing. Uh, Changing gears a bit, Mark, what are some of the biggest challenges that manufacturers are facing when they implement these kinds of digitization solutions or digital solutions? And how have you seen them overcome those barriers?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple things, and I kind of alluded to just a second ago from a change management perspective. Maybe that's a good place to start. You do have to have the right culture in order to do some of these things, and the right belief that it's the right thing to do. All right. In the early days of IoT, when we started talking to the plants, we're like, well, wait a minute. I'm producing product. I've got some tack time. I've got some production schedules. I've got to produce X in order to meet what our customers want. And it's kind of like, well, it's not broken, so I'm not going to touch it. All right. True. All right. But what we need to realize is that we can't keep going on just general continuous improvement. All right. Because it's a gradual upslope. But technology is going like this. And so we need to fill that gap. All right. I can tell you that there's other manufacturers, both in discrete and process industries, that are doing some very cutting edge types of things and are getting returns on investment. So there's a risk that you're not going to be able to keep up, but there's a risk that you're not going to hire the best in class workers because they're going to see other companies that are doing some pretty interesting things. So to me, change management culture is kind of the big thing. Now, if you look at technology, it's people, process, and technology. I think, people and process is kind of the culture side of things. Although you do need to have good people in place in order to do these things. You need people that understand the technology, people that can have a conversation with the business side of manufacturing, all right, or supply chain, or engineering, or sustainability, or any subset thereof, in order to have a good conversation about what can actually be done. Now, the return on investment is a key discussion just about everybody we get into conversations with. And certain companies have different tolerance levels for that. The conversation, I think, is a healthy one to say, what's your desired payback on an investment? All right. In the day of doing CapEx on a big machine that's going to produce 20% more product, that was pretty good. All right. And unfortunately, software kind of, it is like that, but it's also not like that. All right. The good thing is that we can pay for it as we go and as we use it. All right. So I don't think technology is the gating factor. I think, as I said maybe earlier, that things are going to accelerate quite a bit, and that's going to change the complexion. We've already seen that. And to be candid, some of the geopolitical things that are floating around right now are forcing that discussion. All right. And people are saying, how can we be more resilient? How can we think about tariffs and what we need to do along those lines? How can we level up at least to a baseline here's the thing. I work with a lot of big manufacturers. They've got 50, 60 plants around the world. There's plants that have really good practices, and they're saying, well, why can't all of our plants have these things? So those are the conversations we get into. And the good thing is that management, upper management in particular, is starting to pay attention to that. And I do think artificial intelligence is having that conversation. So I tried to wrap up a couple things in there: value, culture, people, certainly processes are kind of coming to play. And maybe we can talk a little about process, kind of futuristically too, because I think that has ramifications for AI and co-pilots and the new buzzword agentic these days that are kind of going to have an impact on processes and current processes.
Would love to hear your thoughts on that. Exactly. I had a question around agentic AI, agentic frameworks, and processes. How do they interact with each other? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
You want to do that now?
Oh yeah, please. Yes, please.
Well, so I mean, if you think about what we can do from agentic, we're actually in here's, to me, what's interesting is I grew up, 40 years ago in the business. All right. And we kind of had the client server, then we had object-oriented programming. This is a revisitation to me a little bit of object-oriented programming, because what we did is we encapsulated in an object a function. All right. Claims adjudication, for example, in the insurance business. All right. And that was the module that did adjudication. Well, that same content is, to me, that's how I understand it, is agentic is going to have that module that says, do the payment system, for example, or be the intake for information on our quality. All right. Be an intake mechanism for maintenance and repair. All right. We're going to have interesting things happen because of that. All right. And easiest way to think about it, and I like the co-pilot structure because it's really inclusive if you think about it, because I can now talk to it. I can verbalize it, and it can translate it to multiple languages, first of all right? But I can also transcribe that and have the agent pick up that bit and put it into the application or system or data lake, database, what have you, that captures that information, where another agent might come along and say, okay, we need to create the task list in 3 months that says we need to redo maintenance on this piece of equipment. So to me, that's going to force us to rethink processes, right? Because I now have these bits of things that I can do through these agents that will perform functions for me. And the user interface is going to change, all right? It might be voice, it might be a form, all right? I mean, here's to me what's funny is the ERP systems have been around for a long time. Well, guess what we did? We put front ends on the top of it because some of those ERP systems aren't exactly easy to use. Yeah. Well, and that changed the way that ERP systems function in organizations. I don't necessarily touch them anymore. All right. I use user interfaces on the front of that through third parties or applications that feed some of this stuff. And the same, I think, is going to be much more exaggerated when we start thinking about agents in use in across the functions across the manufacturing operations.
Yeah, no, fascinating. Yeah, absolutely. I bet we could have a whole separate, hour-long conversation just focused on agents and the promise of agents and what they can, what they cannot probably do. But I appreciate it. So, Mark, another thing that I get the opportunity to talk to a lot of manufacturing IT leaders, and often as opposed to OT leaders. And often the IT leaders will prefer on-premise over cloud. And I don't know if that's just the subsample that I'm talking to, or if that's something that you also see. What are the biggest misconceptions, I guess, that manufacturers have about cloud adoption, or do you see that hesitation as well?
So it's still a conversation, to answer your question point blank. What I think has changed is people understand, quite frankly, that there's a lot of risk in some on-premise systems from a security and attack vector perspective. Uh, about 10 years ago, I was at a conference for one of the automation vendors, and was just chatting with somebody on the side, and he was kind of saying, we get Joe or Sally that goes down into the electronics store and buys a PC, and we attach it next to the PLC or the machine, and guess what virus control is on that? It's the one that came with the box. All right, and that was 10 years ago, and obviously things have gotten a lot better from that perspective. But we've actually seen some cybersecurity issues happen because systems haven't been upgraded, even though they were on premise. And candidly, I think people are realizing that all of the hyperscalers spend a lot of money on security. All right, and if I'm a manufacturer, I can't have that number of people focused on securing my operations. All right. So I think security has changed where people are more receptive to the cloud. All right. The cloud has gotten more stable and more high performance, where I can actually put systems in the cloud. And I hesitate a little bit when you ask that question, because the question tends to come up more on manufacturing execution systems. All right. Can I put an MES in the cloud? And the answer is, yeah, you can. All right. And I can guarantee you I could build it in such a way that's as high performing as what you have on premise today. I mean, we've seen over the last several years, independent software vendors come out with new MESs that were born in the cloud. All right. Similarly, we've seen born in the cloud PLM and engineering design tools. Similarly, supply chain has also had a lot of SaaS type of capabilities out there. And when you start thinking about where my demand comes in, I might have a CRM system that was born in the cloud. All right. So I think it's changing, and it depends on what you want to do. Here's, to me, a little bit of what we see happening, all right, in the space. Number one is I have engineering design that I'm doing, all right? COVID changed the way that we build and think about engineering. We scattered our people around the world. I needed to collaborate more effectively. And an on-premise PLM CAD system was not conducive for that. All right? How do I share this stuff? All right. How do I communicate and collaborate and use things that we have in our daily lives in order to do video conferencing and calls like the one that we're on today? So that bit of digital content, if I'm thinking of that in terms of it's now in the cloud, well, I push that information for the design for manufacturing function. All right. I manufacture it. I've got information. I push that product out to a client. They've got problems. Where does that information need to go? It needs to go back into engineering design. If all those systems are on premise, it becomes much more hard for people to do those types of things. I'll give you another one. New product introductions.
I love that. Yeah.
If I have a new product introduction and my mandate is to do 10% more new product introductions this year, which has a fairly traditional metric for some of the engineering work that we do with our clients. And, oh, by the way, maybe I need to do higher quality in the process. How do I do that with the current structures that I have on premise? Hire more engineers. Well, okay, I can create more new designs, but I still need to test them. That costs a lot of money. Chips are hard to get these days, all right, because all the hyperscalers are buying them. So I can't do my high performance compute simulations on this stuff, but I can do that in the cloud. No, by the way, I can make it cheaper in the cloud and keep you up to date. All right. We've had instances where it's taken 14 hours overnight. Funny story, 14 hours is too long for some companies. because of security risks, they shut off jobs after a certain period of time. So that engineer that set it off, in the middle of the afternoon, thinking that he's going to get his results the next day, doesn't happen because security shut it off. All right. But I can do that same simulation in the cloud for a fraction of the time and a fraction of the cost. And so now I've started to build this digital thread that, to be perfectly candid, is only available if I use the cloud.
Yeah.
Think about that data then that we have across that. Those are candidates for artificial intelligence type of chat GPT, Copilot, analytics, predictive capabilities, even autonomous capabilities, if I have that data. So to me, the argument, maybe it's not an argument anymore, but it's a conversation of what to do. It depends on what the belief of the manufacturer is. If my thought is I need to have digital threads and espouse to model-based engineering, I'm going to have that capability, and the only way I'm going to do it in the cloud. And I can make that discussion pretty evident when people start to think about more of the strategy and what they want to do going forward within manufacturing. By the way, most engineers coming out of school are using the cloud and the elasticity of the cloud to do simulations. It's really easy to put that together for that particular function.
Yeah.
All right, so the next generation of worker is going to be filtered into some of these thinking that the cloud is really the way to do it.
Yeah, yeah. No, this is great. This is a really comprehensive discussion around it. I love those examples. Mark, I don't know if you have opinions on this topic, but interoperability is a kind of connects to agents and the discussion that we were having briefly as well. I know that Azure is now part of the OPC UA cloud initiative. How do open standards like OPC UA impact the future of smart factories and interoperability between different industrial systems?
Yeah, just to clarify, we've been involved in OPC Foundation for quite a long time.
Yeah.
So here's what I think is a key benefit, and actually it's kind of interesting. In the early days of IoT, we had to have those connectors into the devices or build the APIs in order to get the data out. That is becoming somewhat commoditized. I won't say fully commoditized, but it's a lot easier to get low-cost APIs to connect to assets. OPC is a function that allows us to really contextualize some of the information coming from those assets. All right, and so OPC to us is a foundational type of thing that allows us to do that and to connect more things. And as it's pretty much motherhood and apple pie at this point in time, where most of the automation vendors support OPC UA. All right. Now, when I start talking about digital thread, well, it's not just the assets that I need to contextualize. I need to contextualize information for my engineering. I might need to contextualize cost information that may or may not be in my PLM system. All right. And I have different BOMs in different places for the engineering, the manufacturing, as is BOM. All right. And so I need to start contextualizing this information so that I can do smarter things with it. Now, OPC is obviously a function of that, but there's also another layer that needs to be able to contextualize information. And there's a lot of good products out there that help do that. And data models are going to be a function of that as well. To be candid, we're working on data models for all of the industries that we serve. So that makes it easier to contextualize the information and actually use it much more productively in a faster time frame, which means that you get faster return on investment.
That makes sense. That's fantastic. Mark, as we end the call or end the podcast, what is the one thing that manufacturers don't do enough of to be factory forward in 2025? We are called factory forward, and that's a question that I ask all my guests. What do they need to do more? What is something that they need to be educated a little bit more on?
Yeah, think outside the box. I reviewed plans with my clients, and I kind of sit back and, if you look at a lot of the plans for somebody thinking about AI, let's use AI instead of IoT. So we're gonna crawl, walk, run. All right. And I'm like, okay, is that really bold enough? Is that really going to move the needle a whole lot? All right. Well, what are you going to do to bolster the education of people that understand these capabilities? What are you going to do to connect with the business side of the equation? To me, what's funny a little bit, maybe it's not funny to some people, I guess not necessarily funny to me, but the ChatGPT Copilot types of conversations, the people that need that are the business users. Could be an engineer, could be a frontline worker, could be a supply chain, could be a material handler, could be somebody out in the field that needs information. But sometimes we get encumbered by IT, all right? And to me, that's the thinking outside of the box. I think we need to challenge ourselves more. I said earlier that we're in the first quarter of Industry 4.0. AI is going to accelerate that quite a bit. And I think it's owed upon us to figure out how to help accelerate that as a vendor. All right. But also, I think manufacturers need to be bold and question how fast they're moving on some of these things. And quite frankly, rely on the vendors and systems integrators to help them get the ROI equation going well. All right. And to be candid, we haven't done enough in order to show people the value across the board on some of these things. And the good news is that there's a ton of stuff that's happening right now that really does drive a lot of value. People savings, leveraging people, in various levels of their experience and bringing them up to a certain level. It's covering things like supply chain stock outages and anticipating those things. All right, so there's a lot of value, but we don't do probably a good enough job as a whole to show people the value. And I would bet that some of the people in your audience probably can attest to that. And if there's other software vendors out there, they can probably agree with that as well.
Yeah, I think so too. Thank you, Mark. This was fascinating. I learned a ton from, even though it's a brief conversation. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate all those insights, all those stories. From somebody who's really a veteran of this industry, who's been around since before a lot of these terms were even invented. Thank you so much. I look forward to having you again on the podcast, and I appreciate the time.
My pleasure, and thank you very much.
And that's a wrap on this powerhouse episode of Factory Forward. If you love this episode, share it with your network and keep the conversation going on social media using #FactoryForward. Until next time, keep challenging the status quo and striving for excellence. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode of Factory Forward.